Hey, hello everybody. It's episode 22 from Grizzlies Worldwide podcast. And tonight we are heading to Nashville, Tennessee, of course. And together on this with us on this episode we have Bryson Wright from the Next Gen podcast. Bryson, first of all, I want to thank you so much for being here, for your availability to join us. And first of all, of course, I want to ask you, how are you doing this evening?
Yeah, I'm doing great. And I just wanted to say thanks for having me on. And I always want to support people from around the world that love the Grizzlies just as much as I do. So I'm really glad you're doing this podcast and finding people from all across the world. I know you've had a lot of great episodes so far. And I just want really appreciate that. So, yeah, but everything's going good today. Had a good day today. And always excited to talk about the Grizzlies.
Yeah, me too. Thank you for your kind words. And yeah, me too. Always excited to talk about Grizzlies basketball. So heading on to the Grizzlies basketball. Okay, let's start. I'm going to ask about last season, but let's start. Okay, the season. Uh, it's not even training camp, and Gigi is out. Maybe till December. Um, is this a bad start for the Grizzlies, or is just something that can happen?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely not the way you want to start the season, especially based on, talking about last season. They
Mm-hmm.
had the worst injury luck in the history of the NBA, basically, had the most different starting lineups, most different players, all that. So I think that if it wasn't coming right off of that, obviously the injury's a bummer either way. But for
Mm-hmm.
it to come like right after that big season, it does. I think it does provide a little bit of caution, maybe be a little bit nervous going into the year with that. Not because I think the Grizzlies are going to be bad or anything, but just because I was really hoping Gigi would be able to get into a rhythm early in the season so that by, the middle, the end of the season, he would be possibly fighting to be in the starting lineup and stuff like that. I wanted him to be able to have like a full training camp and everything because he's super young. So that's definitely a downside. Luckily, it does seem like it's not a season-ending injury. He is going
Mm-hmm.
to be coming back around December or January, and we've also seen something similar to this with Jaron. I think 2 seasons ago, where he
Yeah.
broke his foot over the summer, and then he actually ended up coming back earlier than a lot of people
Earlier.
expected. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
so not to say that Gigi will be the same. Uh, the earliest I'd expect him to be back would probably be like late December. But I think most people, if you're talking about a timeline for him, it's probably going to be early January, which that'll be about 30 games of the season, which is a big chunk of the season, obviously. But they play 82 games. I think that the rest of the roster is good enough to where missing GG Jackson isn't going to completely derail the season. But it's definitely going to hurt them in terms of their depth. And you might see, I think you're going to see a little bit more Jalen Wells, probably some more Jake LaRavia, guys like that, than you probably would have seen or expected to
Mm-hmm.
see going into the season. But as long as Gigi comes back healthy around that 3 month mark
Yeah.
from his injury, not 3 months into the season, but 3 months, basically 3 months from now. If he's able to come back around that time, I think it'll be just fine.
So like October, like December, end of December, you saying?
Yeah, like I would probably say he might not come back until January, but I
Mm-hmm.
think in December we should see him, practicing with the team, getting his
Mm-hmm.
conditioning together. The team is very cautious about injuries, and with how young Gigi is, I'd expect them to be cautious with him as well. But I do think like that giving him till January gives him like a couple extra weeks after that 3 month timeline they kind of put out. So I think January is a solid bet on when we see him, and if we see him at all in December, I would say that's a positive, and he's actually back probably earlier than you would expect.
Yeah, and also, do you think that it's like wise decision if like not to rush because probably if there are not significant injuries, there's like no need to rush and to risk something worse with Gigi in this case. Like to
Well,
take a cautious approach. That's what I mean.
yeah, 100%. Well, because the worst case scenario would be he comes back too early and then he is still hurt or he's not 100%, or he gets injured again and then he misses later games, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the good thing about him, like obviously you never want somebody to get hurt. Hopefully everybody can stay healthy, everything like that, but it's going to happen. And if somebody is going to get hurt, it's better for it to happen at this time so that they'll be hurt, they'll be out the beginning of the season, but it's almost like they just get an extended off season with some rehab, and then
Yeah,
when they
for
come
sure.
back, hopefully they can be back to full go, and you're not worried about them. You're worried about them game 32, 33. Hopefully by the time you get to game 40, 50, they're in a good rhythm, and then the end of the season they're basically back to 100%, rather than
Yeah.
you have sometimes where guys will get hurt middle of the season and then they're just not ready for the postseason. So I think they will be super cautious because the Grizzlies are definitely expecting to be in the playoffs this year. So they're going to be
Mm-hmm.
cautious to make sure that if GG Jackson isn't 100%, they're not going to risk that and risk him possibly being out longer, possibly re-injuring that, whatever, when they don't need to.
Yeah. Okay. Of course, when the news came out, I think that we all as a Grizzlies fan have this PTSD thing with the injuries leading into last season, and uh, I was going to ask you, of course, about last season. First of all, as for you, and before we go up to the upsides and downsides and silver linings for last season, for you as a Grizzlies fan, how was it for you to watch last season with all the mayhem that was going on?
It was, I mean, obviously, I think it was just a tough year in general. Whenever the team gets to that level, which that, just in terms of how long I've been a fan, that hasn't been something that we've been super accustomed to. We've had some off years, like the year before they got job with Jaren's rookie
Mm-hmm.
year, the 20 like 17, 18. Like we've had some years like that, but last year was one of the first times where it was like most of the games going into it, I was like, we're probably going to lose this game, right? In the
Mm-hmm.
other years, it was like, okay, even if you are probably going to lose the game, they'll keep it competitive, all that. But it was like this year that they just didn't have the talent on the roster once all those injuries came through. And I mean, when you look at it across the league, I mean, how many teams, when you are missing 10, 11, 12 guys every night, could
Yeah.
even field a competitive team? So that was the main thing that was tough. But on the other side, it kind of made me like rethink what I was looking for going into the game. Because obviously you want to win regardless, but it's like you're looking more for progression from certain players.
Mm-hmm.
How did GG play? Jaren was healthy most of the season. Like, how can he play? How could he be better as like the first option, and stuff like that. But yeah, it was just it's really hard to evaluate that kind of stuff. Like like it's tough to evaluate what you think about Jaren Jackson Jr.'s season when half the season he was playing next to guys that will mostly be in the G League and on two-way contracts this year.
Yeah.
So it's just really hard to evaluate your main guys when they don't play together. But that 9 game stretch when everybody was there, that was when Ja came
Yeah.
back and
Yeah. Yeah.
Bain and Smart and all that, they did look like the team we would hope they could be, especially going back to LA in that Lakers game. I think it kind of felt like, okay, the team itself, despite all the injuries, despite all that, this is still a super talented team. This is still a team that could make some noise. And then it was just the injuries just attacked again, basically.
At that point at the season when Ja came back, and for a short period of time, everyone was healthy. And despite the fact that when Ja came back, if I'm not mistaken, we had a 6-19 record. Did you still expect us to at least make the play-in
It
before
would have
Ja got hurt?
yeah. Before Ja got hurt, it would have been a long shot. Like they would have had to make up a lot of ground. But
Mm-hmm.
I do think that if Ja had been healthy, and if they had kept winning at that rate, because I mean they were like 6-3. If they had
Yeah.
kept winning at that rate, I think they probably could have snuck into the 10 seed maybe. But I mean, there was no way they would have made it to the top six. But I do feel like I mean they just had such those first like 25 games without Ja, then Smart going down as well in that time, and some other injuries. They just like once you start 6-19, it's hard to even get back to 500. And then last year the West was so good that even getting back to 500 wouldn't have been enough to get you into the play-in. So I do think they could have done it, but it would have been very difficult. Like they would have had to had like a 10 game win streak or something like we've seen them have in past seasons.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but without like one of those streaks, I don't think they could have done it. But I mean, definitely not impossible because kind of like I said earlier with the GG injury, the season is so long. Like if they had only won 6 games, but if they had won, 40 out of their next 60 or something crazy, which would have been 2 out of 3, maybe they would have had a chance.
Yeah. And also for starting the season, of course, we knew that Ja was going to be out for 25 games. That was known. And also that was the thing that we knew that just, I think that 2 or 3 days before the season started, that also Steven Adams was going to be out for the rest of the season. That too. Right. So uh, now, still, okay, it was two questions I still want to ask you about this last season. Do you think that in some sort of way, like, because the Grizzlies, a couple seasons ago, they lost on the playoffs against the Warriors when Ja got hurt, and for 2 seasons they were the second seed in the West. Okay, they lost with the previous season. They lost with Lakers in the playoffs, but they didn't have BC and Steven Adams also. So it was like it seemed like, okay, despite the fact that Ja was out for 25 games, it could be like a season for the Grizzlies to continue to like ramp up from where they've been in the past. Um, it didn't turn out this that way, as we know. Do you think that, in some sort of sense, that can bring up like to the core to the team some sort of resilience, to make them come back stronger in the future?
Yeah, no, I definitely think that last season, especially for Jaron,
Yeah,
because Jaron,
I am sorry to interrupt you because you mentioned Jaren, and I remember Jaren saying a couple of months ago, I think it was on Chris Vernon's show, we never want to be on that place again. But
yeah, no, that's exactly what I was gonna get to. Is like, for the people that were injured, like obviously Ja was injured for a lot of the season, Bane was injured for a lot of the season out of the big three. But I think for Jaron, that's gonna be, I think him just having to deal with all those losses. He's a competitive person. Nobody likes to lose. I feel like that's gonna definitely take his game to another level because I think he's just gonna have a newfound hate for losing.
hmm,
Not necessarily that nobody likes to lose, but I think
of course.
when you lose so many games in such a short time period, and you're basically the main guy in a lot of those games, I think that does have a big effect. So I do hope that it has like the biggest effect on him, and we see him kind of embrace a little bit of the dirty work kind of stuff a little bit more this year, whether that's rebounding,
Hmm.
banking down into post a little bit more, being more physical, everything like that. But I do think just in general, the team is going to be very resilient. I also think that it's good that most people in like the national scene are not really talking about the Grizzlies at all this offseason, especially
Mm-hmm.
like after last offseason. It just felt like last offseason was very loud. Like it was the Lakers stuff, so you had all these LeBron fans were coming after the Grizzlies the whole season.
Mm-hmm.
You had the whole Josh situation where he gets suspended and all of that. So there's just so much going on around the Grizzlies last offseason that it really felt like we couldn't really talk about basketball as much, you know. And you had the injuries. Well, with Steven Adams going to come back, Brandon Clark had a torn Achilles. Like there's just so much going on within that offseason. And the Marcus Smart trade. That's another thing that happened. So like all of that happened in like basically 2 months or so, right? And then I think this offseason has been a lot quieter. Haven't really made a really big splashy move. Mostly just stuck to the draft. Uh, Kept a lot of the same guys from last year that did get injured. And then hopefully they'll be back to 100% this year. But I mean, I think they're a very resilient group, and I think you do see that from even though last year didn't end up the way anybody wanted it to. In a lot of those games, even though they did lose, they were at least somewhat competitive
Mm-hmm.
up until the end. They never gave up on any games, and that's just kind of like the culture that I feel like they've built. And then I think this year, if they have like the talent that they're supposed to have, and everybody can stay healthy, which health is going to be the number one thing with this team any year. But it's like if they can stay healthy, I think that they are primed to be back. Even if it's not the 2 seed, back in the top 4 or 5 in the
Mm-hmm.
West. Uh, Definitely avoiding the play-in. That's the number one thing. You don't want to be in the play-in. But I
Yeah.
think they definitely have the mentality and the pieces that they need to bounce back this year, and I think they'll bounce back. And like I said, this offseason has been quiet. I'm hoping the regular season is going to be more of a statement, especially early in the season too.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh, Still regarding last season, how did you see um okay, two questions. Silver linings, Vince Williams and Gigi.
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, Vince Williams Jr. is one of those guys that I would like if you're a coach, every coach across the world would love to have a guy like Vince Williams Jr. on his team. What
Mm-hmm.
he's going to go out there and he's going to defend the best player. He's going to rebound. He's going to facilitate, which I think is probably the most underrated thing about his game. Is that he had a couple near triple doubles last year. Has been a really solid passer, and I think
Mm-hmm.
that's going to improve. I mean, he was a great passer, and he was passing to Jacob Gilliard and guys like that. Which I love Gilly, but passing to Jacob Gilliard versus now you're passing to John Moran on a cut. Like that's a lot different. It's a lot easier to get assists that way. So I think that him, especially if he does play with the core three guys, a guy like Edie as well. Uh, I think he'll work well with him just because he likes to pass the ball. He's a great connective passer, and that's what I love on offense. And then he can shoot the three. He can shoot the three very well. Uh, Obviously, I think that's something he's going to continue to work on, and I think that's going to be more important for him this year, especially if he does end up in the starting lineup. Because we've seen times where teams will kind of pick a guy to not worry about, and if the starting lineup is Ja, Bane, Vince, then Jaren and Edie, I think Vince would probably be the guy that they try to funnel shots to. So if he's
Mm-hmm.
knocking those down, then that just makes the offense even harder to guard because if you can't leave him, it's going to be harder to bring more help to Ja. It's going to be harder to bring more help on Jaren. You're going to have more open looks for Bane. So I think if he plays well, it's just going to open everything else up. And then with Gigi Jackson, I actually wrote a draft profile on Gigi going into
You
the
did?
draft last year. Yes, I did.
I was going to ask you, did you know him before he was drafted? Oh,
Yeah, so like before he was
yeah.
drafted, and
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember exactly how I worded it. At the time, I was like, I wasn't sure if the Grizzlies were going to get another young player because they were so worried about getting veterans. They had just tried to trade for Marcus Smart, all that, and I was like, But if they are going to take an upside swing pick, I thought it should be Gigi. And I was saying that for the 25th pick, which they actually traded out of. They traded the 25th pick to the
Mm-hmm.
Celtics, I'm pretty sure. But they traded either the Celtics, Jazz. It was like a big trade. I think it was multiple teams traded it. But
Mm-hmm.
besides the point, they ended up traded that, and I thought there is no way they would still be able to get Gigi after they traded that pick. For them to get him at 45 is not only the steal of the draft, like it might be it's one of the biggest draft night steals. To me, I think it might turn out to be one of the biggest ones in recent memory. I'm not saying it's going to be like a Jokic or Jalen Brunson type where it's like you're going to look
Mm-hmm.
up and GG is going to be like a top 10 player in the league. Maybe it doesn't end up like that, but his potential is that he could be one of the best players in the NBA. Like I have no doubt about that. When you look at the way he played as an 18-year-old, when you look at how even though he struggled sometimes with South Carolina, with him being just 17 years old, playing against grown men, people
Yeah.
22, 23 that have been playing for multiple years, especially with the COVID years and everything. There's dudes that were 24 years old playing against him. He was 17 and he was holding his own. And then last year, to go out and have a 30 40 point game against the Lakers, playing against LeBron and everything. I just thought it was pretty awesome, especially when you consider the fact that Gigi wasn't even born when LeBron came into the NBA.
Yeah, that's
So
amazing.
yeah, so like that was just awesome to see. And I think that the way you saw him play in summer league too this year, I thought he had a really good summer league, even though
Mm-hmm.
he started a little bit slow in Utah. I think once he got to Vegas, he just turned it into a new gear, and he officially looked too good to be in summer league anymore. I don't think we're gonna see any more Gigi Jackson in summer league. I think this is
So,
probably gonna be his last one, but it was just I was really happy to see him get the opportunity when he did. I honestly was hoping he would get the opportunity a little bit earlier than he did, especially once like Smart got injured like super early in the season. He
mm-hmm.
basically just got thrown into the game because it was against the Clippers. I think Ty Lue picked him to be the free throw shooter because I think it was when Bane got hurt, if I remember right. Like Bane got hurt, he was supposed to shoot the free throw, couldn't, and then they picked Gigi to be the free throw shooter, and he came in the game, and then ended up playing the rest of the second half of that game, and then the next night had a big game. So it was just awesome to really see him just just look the part. And I mean, this is a dude who in high school would have been the number one. He was the number one player in his class before he reclassified, and then he kind of dropped down because he was going against guys a year older than him. But it was still just awesome to see kind of his potential and for that to be realized pretty early on.
If it was this year draft, if Gigi was on this year's draft, what pick do you think he could be?
So, especially when you consider a lot of the other things, he was supposed to go to North Carolina as well. Like that was where he was supposed to go at first. I think that if Gigi Jackson had played as well as he did at South Carolina, but he was playing with a North Carolina team that had a lot more talent around him, I mean, I think he would have been a top 5 pick just because his size, first of all, he
Mm,
has like the perfect size for an NBA player, 6'8", 6'9", still
mm-hmm.
growing. The jumper is improving. Obviously, we saw that last year. And then his ability to just drive to the basket and everything like that on offense, uh, and then get to the mid range. I like that he handles the ball very well for his size, especially when it comes to getting to, getting to the rim and getting into the paint and everything like that.
Mm-hmm.
And he's really fast for a dude who's as big as he is. And then on the defensive end, that's probably where people have more concerns than anything else.
Yeah.
But you have to keep in mind, like I said, he's just now 19 years old, and he's so athletic that like anytime that he struggles on defense, it's not because he's not athletic enough. It's not because he's not tall enough. It's just because he doesn't know what he's doing yet. And you can teach people to become better defenders. You can't take a random dude and make him 6'9", make him 6'10", and be like, all right, now go out there and play defense. So I think
Uh-huh.
I think that just as he gets older, as he continues to grow as a player, we're gonna see a different version of Gigi than we've seen this year, and I think it's gonna be quick, man. Like I think in the next 2-3 seasons, we're gonna continue to see it, especially if he can stay healthy. Obviously, this year it's gonna suck to see him early in the year not be out there, but I'm hoping once he gets back, he can stay healthy, and we can continue to see why people had him ranked as the number one player in his class at one point.
Yeah, and okay, and you mentioned the defense, and of course the fact that he still has to learn, of course. One of the things that I read about Gigi on he was not very coachable. Do How does that sound to you right now?
So I think that does stem from some stuff that happened when he was at South Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if I'd necessarily say that he wasn't coachable at South Carolina, but he did like butt heads with the coaches a little bit. I think there were some times where, but like all the times he butted heads with the coaches, at least from what I saw, it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't like, wow, I hate my coach. My coaches are telling me that I need to work harder and I don't want to work harder. It was never something like that. It was never like, oh, yeah, my coaches are trying to get me to do these extra workouts. I'm not doing that. The only times I ever saw him get mad at his coaches was like he didn't get the ball at the end of a game and he wanted the ball because he thought he would win it. Like he's that type of dude to where he's gonna get mad because the ball wasn't in his hands on the
Mm-hmm.
last play with a chance to win because he thinks he's gonna win it. More than he's the type of dude who wants to, skip workouts, do stuff like that. Like I don't think uncoachable would be the right way to describe it. I think he's passionate, and I think on an NBA level, especially this season, they've got him to be a lot more accountable than they probably had him when he was in South Carolina. I think there was also a time where he had to miss a game or didn't start a game because he violated team rules or he missed a meeting, something like that. So
Yeah,
they've done a good job on keeping him accountable, and I think that is going to be positive going forward.
yeah, yeah. Okay, and okay, I mentioned the draft. Going to the draft. Before the draft, were you okay? We had the seventh pick. Then we on the lottery we got the ninth pick. There was this debate on a lot of Grizzlies fans were talking about Klingon. Were you on Klingon train? Were you on Edie train? Were you on no train? Where were you?
So I actually, my first hope was that the Grizzlies would be able to get a center, like maybe an Isaiah Hartenstein, somebody like that, uh, to come in that was a veteran. That was my first hope to see if they could do
To
that
uh-huh.
because I knew they were going to have to get a center. I think it was everybody knew the Grizzlies needed a new
Yeah.
center, especially after Steven Adams not being there. But I was hoping that they would maybe try to bring in a veteran as well, and then maybe draft draft a center later because I did think there were some good center prospects like a Khalil Ware,
Mm-hmm.
like a Eves Misi, somebody like that who you could go with. But once the draft actually came around and it kind of shook out the way it did, especially with Ron Holland going at 5. Ron Holland was one of the guys where I was like, if he does fall to 10, I'd take him because I think he was similar to Gigi. A lot of guys say he could have had like some of the like one of the best talents in the draft, everything like that. So once he kind of came off the board, I was like, okay, I wouldn't be surprised if they do decide to get a center. We know that they tried to trade up. They did try to trade up for Klingon
Uh-huh.
with the Hornets, but that kind of fell through, or at least
Yeah.
that was reported.
Yes.
Uh,
Yeah.
So, but to me, if it was between Edie and Klingon, I I think that Edie probably does make more sense now. Not sure if that's exactly what I was thinking going into the draft, but I had similar issues with both of them. Uh, I felt like like Klingon, what I think is going to be better defensively early on, but I think Edie's going to be much better offensively, and I think that the defense that Edie will bring along with that, I think probably will end up being better than Klingon early on. And then, I mean, the size, I mean, both of them are big guys, and I think both of them are going to struggle to cover in space. But then once you went to the combine and Edie kind of tested better than Klingon, and basically every agility drill, vertical, whatever, like he tested better than Klingon on most of that stuff. So once that came out, and then obviously they played each other in the championship game, and
Mm-hmm.
Edie dominated them. So I'm like, I wasn't necessarily on the Edie train as much as some people were, but I was definitely fine with them taking Edie. I'm not sure exactly where he's gonna end up being like in the rotation. I mean, he should be starting, but in
Mm-hmm.
terms of how many minutes he plays, I'm not sure how many minutes he's gonna play. Just because I'm not expecting him to have like full on, 30 minutes a night
Mm-hmm.
early on.
Maybe
I'd,
like
I'd
20, 15,
yeah,
20.
yeah, like I'd probably say around 20 to 23, 24 maybe.
Mm-hmm.
But another thing that was a positive for him though is that, I mean, I know he did get injured in summer league, but
Uh-huh.
he had been very durable in college. He was very durable in college, and he also played a lot of minutes in college, where he was playing 35 plus minutes in a lot of those games, and he was in great shape. So I think that all points to him it being a positive this year. And even if he doesn't go, like I'm not expecting him to go out there and average 20 a game or anything like that, or be nearly as dominant as he was in college. That's just not fair to him. But
Of
I
course.
could very easily see him averaging a double double, whether it's 10 points, 10 rebounds a game. I think for him that should probably be around his goal. If he's doing that, I mean, you saw how good they were when they had Steven Adams. We
Yeah.
all know how good that team was.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's like, I'm not saying that Edie does everything to the level Steven Adams does. Obviously he's not a veteran. He's got a lot of stuff to learn. But in terms of like setting screens, I think he'll be great at it. He's going to be a good rebounder. And then he also adds, even though I don't think he's going to be a guy where they're just going to throw him the ball and say, all right, go get a bucket, get in the post. We're going to throw you the ball 15, 20 times a game like they did in college. Like that's just
Yeah.
not how the NBA works these days. But he does have better touch around the rim than Steven Adams did. And I think a lot of those hook shots and stuff like that we saw Steven Adams miss, Zach Edey's not going to miss those, because I mean that's what he's been doing. That was his bread and butter. That's how he was averaging 25 points a game in college. So I think all of that is going to be all positive for him. And then like I said, the main negative is just how well is he going to be able to defend on the perimeter. But
Uh,
I
yeah.
continue to say this. I had the same issues with Klingon, and a lot of the centers just in the NBA that are of that archetype, you're going to have that issue.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that because there was also this question: how will his game translate to the NBA? And as you just said, it's for me it's not fair. Like like to take a center like Edie or we saw in the playoffs like Gobert with Doncic. It's like really not fair to you know to try to how can I put this it's like it's really not their game, right? That's what
Hmm.
I mean. So how do you think that his game will translate to the NBA?
Yeah. So I think, especially in the Grizzlies offense, I mean, the fact that he was such a good screener in college, I think that's going to be a positive running in this offense. I think that his inside game is going to translate very well, especially when it comes to like offensive rebounds, putback stuff like that. I don't think he's going to be able to just completely dominate on offense the way that he did in college.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like I said, I do think a lot of his buckets are going to come more off of putbacks, more pick and roll stuff, more than just straight up post work, straight up passing the ball,
Mm-hmm.
post entry passes, and then he goes to work, kind of like what we saw a little bit when he was in summer league. I think we'll see more of those games where it might be he has 12 points and 10 boards, or 14 boards and 10 points or something like that, rather than like a 20 and 10, 30 and 10 type of game. Just because I don't think he's going to get that many shots up. But I will say this: if NBA teams are going to you're going to have a 7-footer on him at all times. If you throw out one of these gimmicky kind of small center guys or
Mm-hmm.
somebody like that, that's not going to work against him. That's what he destroyed when he was in college. When he had the 6'8", 6'9" centers that would try to guard him, they just had absolutely no chance.
Yeah.
And even a guy like I love like a Nick Claxton, somebody like that, great player.
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
think that a guy like Edie, with as much size as he is, because everybody talks about the fact that he's 7'4", this man is also over 300 pounds.
Yeah.
Like that is
Yeah.
a big dude. That is not easy. Like I think that there's a lot of times where you're going to see people are not going to want to be physical with him in the paint. He's going to have a lot of great box outs. He's going to have a lot of uncontested rebounds and stuff like that because of that. And I do think that it's going to translate in that way. But like I said, the only thing that I don't know how much it'll translate is just the full on back to the basket game where he's doing that 10, 20 times a game. Like I don't see that. But I think a lot of the other stuff that he brought to the table, even on the defensive end, because I mean, it's one thing to say, yeah, okay, if he's switching on to a guard, like you don't want him out there guarding
Of
Luka,
course.
but I mean, I don't think there's any center in the NBA that's like, oh yeah, I want the 7'4" dude guarding me for the whole game.
Yeah, for sure.
Just the extra length, the extra size, all of that. And then we saw some of it in college and some of it in summer league as well, which in college they were also, because people will look and be like, oh, he didn't have great block numbers in college. That was also because the college coaches told him to be very careful on the defensive end a lot of the time,
Mm-hmm.
because they knew that if he was in foul trouble, they had no chance to win the game. I think that this year with the Grizzlies, he'll have a lot more freedom to kind of go for those blocks, because they do have Jaron, they do have Santi, they do have BC, and some
See.
guys that can come in for him and still provide, good defense, some boards, everything like that. And I think that him having that freedom, we are going to see him average more blocks. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if he averages between 1.5, 2 blocks this year, if not more, if he's a starter. I mean, it's very well that he could average more. But just between having him, and I think pairing him with Jaron is going to be perfect for both of them, because I think they both do a lot of the things that the other one struggles with. Whereas Edie would struggle on the perimeter, Jaron is a
Mm-hmm.
really good perimeter defender. He can
Mm-hmm.
shoot the ball, he can handle the ball. And then on the other side, where Jaron's deficiencies are, he's not as physical, he's not as good of a rebounder. I think
Mm-hmm.
Edie completely shores that up and lets both of them focus on what they're the best at, and it kind of limits their deficiencies. And I think that's why that front court duo between the two of them, I think it's going to be really awesome to watch that this season.
Yeah, and also, yeah, as you mentioned, it also allows Jaren to come back to his what I think is his natural position, like more like a roaming defender, a power forward.
Oh yeah, 100%. And then the
Yeah.
other thing is that even if he is doing more of the roaming stuff like that, you
Mm-hmm.
still have Edie in there who's 7'4". So it's like, all right, you can decide to go to the paint and you can go over Jared, or you can go over the 7'4" dude. And it's like either way,
You're gonna be
I
in trouble.
yeah, like I wouldn't want to have to deal with it. Just
Yeah. Yeah,
especially when you're talking about the smaller guards as well that we see kind of dominate. Especially if it's like a De'Aaron Fox, Tyrese Maxey, like guys that are smaller that live in the paint, live getting to the rim. I think that it's going to be tougher for those guys to. You might see them pull a couple mid range jumpers, a couple more 3 pointers, not trying to deal with that going
yeah,
in against the towers like that.
yeah, 100%. Yeah, for sure, for sure. And okay, still about the draft. On the second round, we got Jalen Wells and Cam Spencer. Your take on both of them, and what role can they have on the Grizzlies, not only on this season but going forward?
Yeah, so I'll start with Cam Spencer because
Hmm.
honestly, Jalen Wells was not super high on my radar. Like that was not a guy that I had done a lot of research on going into the draft. But Cam Spencer, I'm a college basketball fan too, so I obviously watched that UConn team last year, and I just thought his poise, right? Because he was a fifth year senior. He's an older guy,
Hmm.
so he the way that he was always poised, always stayed calm, ran the pick and roll to perfection, didn't turn the ball over, took smart shots. Like he just did all the things that you want to see from a young guy coming into the NBA. And I think that he's the type of dude that you could put him in any lineup, and he can make it better. He's a good passer. We saw that in the summer league. He was
Yeah.
a good passer. Obviously, great from behind the arc, which that's going to be the number one thing that I think will get him on the floor at some point. Even if it doesn't get him onto a full time contract this season, I think we
Hmm.
will see him just because of how good of a shooter he is. And then on the defensive end, obviously he's not, a great defender, but he's competitive. He's
Yeah.
so competitive and he's fiery. Like he if you score on him, it's gonna be because you did everything you could. It's not gonna be because he was taking a play off. He doesn't take plays off, stuff like that. So I
Hmm.
think that was a lot of the stuff that I saw from him that I really enjoyed. And then like I said, the poise and the pace that he plays with. A lot of guys in the NBA like today, and I'm not saying that he's gonna become like a Luka type of player, but when you look at the way Luca plays, it throws people off because he plays slow. And I
Yeah.
think Cam does, obviously not to the level that Luca does, but
Hmm.
he the way that he plays at his own pace. He doesn't let anybody speed him up. And I think all of that is going to be really important, especially if he's going to be playing the two guard and he's playing next to a guy like Ja or somebody like that, in certain situations. I think it actually could help, especially if he's like uh, a secondary ball handler, or he's also good enough to where he could play point guard as well. So I think that does give him a little bit more versatility uh, over like a couple of the other guards, mainly like Luke Kennard. I think Luke doesn't really have as much of the point guard stuff that I think Cam
I
probably
agree.
could have. But
Uh-huh.
obviously, Cam's not going to be in the rotation early on. But I think that's one thing that I think Cam would have over a guy like Lucas because you could play him as the point guard as well if you had to. And then Jalen Wells, which obviously doing like more research on him after he got drafted, seeing he went to Sonoma State, he was at a smaller school, and then watching his Washington State tape. Like the number one thing about him that I liked is that he doesn't over dribble ever. Like you watch some of these guys, especially in college, and they're dribbling 10, 15 times maybe before they get to a shot, or they're just
Hmm.
completely ball dominant. They have to have the ball in their hands at all time in order to be as effective as possible. Whereas when you look at the way that he played off the ball a lot. He had a lot of catch and shoot opportunities. He had a lot of opportunities where he's coming off of pin down screens, taking two or three dribbles into a pull up midi, uh, running the pick and roll and coming off and taking a pull up three. And then you saw it in summer league too, especially in that Utah game, which I know he didn't shoot the ball super well in that game. He started out really bad, But the
Okay.
game where he ended with the game winner and in the fourth quarter, he was just incredible. He's one of those guys where it's like if he gets hot, he's going to be really tough to stop. And I do think, and like, there's a reason they picked him earlier than Cam, and there's a reason they signed him. They signed him to the main roster instead of
Yeah.
Cam. I think it's mostly just because of his size. First off, like he's legit 6'8", and like a 6'8" dude that can move, like similar to Gigi. When you get a guy who's 6'8" that is as quick as he is, it can cause a lot of problems, a lot of mismatches. And then you add in the fact that he's a really good shooter, which is another thing. Both guys the Grizzlies drafted in the second round were both had multiple seasons shooting above 40% from three in college. And that is like a proven track record of you are like, if there's one thing they're going to do, they're going to shoot the ball well. And I think that's what you need more than anything in today's NBA when it comes to role players. So, like, when it comes to second round picks, I mean, Zach Kleiman has done a great job. And I think that both of these guys can just be added to a long list of great guys, even if it wasn't second round, just guys that got drafted later than they probably should have been and have become really good players. So I'm really excited to see both of them play. I know Cam is probably going to be more of a hustle guy early on, but I do
Hmm.
think we see both of them. We're going to see both of them at some point this season.
Yeah. You were mentioning summer league. You watched summer league. You talked already about Jalen Wells, Spencer. We didn't get to see much of Edie, of course, because he got injured. Um, how did you overall? How did you watch summer league and like an emphasis on Scottie Pippen Jr.?
Yeah, so I mean, coming away from the summer league, Scottie Pippen Jr. was my biggest like standout performance for sure. I think he should have been the MVP of the summer league, no
Yeah,
question. Like
for
when you
sure.
look at the way he was scoring, facilitating, and then
The
leading,
stealing.
yeah, leading the summer league in steals on the other end. When you're also averaging like I think 21 and 7, 8
Mhm,
assists, like that's really tough. And then for also the Grizzlies were undefeated basically going into the playoffs too. So adding that, so I definitely think he either him or even Gigi, they both had a case to be the summer
mhm,
league MVP. But I think Scottie Pippen probably would have got it, Scottie Pippen Jr. But I think that the way he played, I know that we have it on the docket to talk about who's going to get that 15th roster spot,
mhm,
and I'm not sure if it's going to be Scotty just because he is already on the two way, but I think that there is a possibility that if if they still have an open roster spot around the trade deadline, or even if they sign somebody that they then decide to trade around the
mhm.
trade deadline and then they open up a new roster spot, whenever that happens, I think Scottie Pippen Jr. would be the first person that they would call up. And I think it could be a possibility that, especially, if, God forbid there's another injury, but if, you don't know how Marcus Smart's doing and you're going into the playoffs or something happens to him or something happens to Luke or somebody like that. And you're like, you need another guard who can come in, already knows the system, has already played with these guys. I mean, I think he would be the number one person that they would try to bring up from that two way so that he could play in the postseason.
Speaking of the two-way and versus the standard contract, do you think that's clever for the Grizzlies organization just to, for now to keep him on a two-way? Because he can play 50 regular season games and then later on in the season see what happens, or do you think that he should be signed right now?
So I think the number one thing, especially whenever you're contending, whereas the Grizzlies want to be contenders, flexibility is the number one thing that you want in your roster. And
Mm-hmm.
adding those guys on the two-way contracts rather than having them on the full contracts, because I mean, especially knowing you're not going to trade Scottie Pippen Jr. You're not going to trade Cam Spencer. Like those are guys going into the season when you're like, they don't even if you sign them to the main roster, they wouldn't even make enough money for you to really make a real trade with it. So
Hmm.
it really doesn't hurt you that much. And then they, like you said, they can still play those 50 games on the two way. The only way that it would hurt you is if going into the postseason you desperately need somebody. Like we know a couple years ago when Brandon Clark got hurt, that's how they ended up converting Kenneth Lofton Jr. was because
Hmm.
they needed somebody, because even though he didn't really play in the postseason, they were like they needed another big guy just in case something else happened. They needed somebody to be, like a third or fourth big man because they didn't really have anybody else. And I think that if they are in a situation like that, that's when you could see a Cam Spencer, Scottie Pippen Jr., maybe even Jay Huff if there's something that goes on with some of the big guys. If, either somebody isn't playing well or somebody has an injury or something like that, you could see him get called up as well. But I think for now, having them on the two way isn't really an issue. I believe that Scottie Pippen Jr. will eventually be on the full time roster along with Cam Spencer, but having that flexibility going into this season, you can see how Luke plays on his new deal. You can see how Jalen Wells, Vince Williams, like all these guys are really gonna like settle in. You can see how Jake LaRavia is gonna play if maybe he becomes somebody you can trade at the trade deadline, or if he plays himself
Hmm.
into rotation. It's just like you have so many different moving parts, and I think having them on those two ways just makes you a little bit more flexible. Uh, and then, especially if they do add another tradable contract as the 15th, like if they, either pick somebody up or they sign one of the guys they just picked up for training camp to that last deal to a deal that's a little bit more tradable. I think that it could be a possibility to where they pick up somebody now and then they trade them at the deadline, and then instead of getting somebody back, they're like, oh, we'll just take a pick and we'll convert Scotty or we'll convert Cam to that full time deal, kind of like we saw last year with Vince and Gigi.
Hmm. Hmm. So, are you okay with 14-man roster, or do you think that we should fill up that space?
I think they're gonna fill it up, whether it could be like a Lamar Stevens. I know Lamar Stevens is still a
Hmm.
free agent. I
Hmm.
wouldn't be surprised if they brought him back just because I think he provides, just a toughness, veteran
Yeah,
leadership,
yeah,
all
yeah,
that
yeah,
kind of
yeah,
stuff.
yeah, for
And
sure.
then, and when he played last season, I thought he played really well.
Yeah, yeah, me
Uh,
too, me too.
but
I was
at this
impressed.
point, yeah, like at this point, I don't expect them to sign a free agent that we aren't familiar with. Like I don't expect them to go out and sign somebody that, hasn't been on the team before. I think
Hmm.
it'll either be they just roll with 14 and then maybe they wait and see if they can trade for somebody, or they trade for trade a one player to get to somebody, something like that. That's a possibility. But I feel like most of their moves for the offseason are pretty much set. So unless it's them signing one of the guys they brought in for training camp, or converting one of the two-way guys,
Hmm.
or bringing in Lamar Stevens, I don't really think there's going to be anything else that would happen besides that.
Okay, so going to of course still on the off season, of course, and going on to the free agency. Uh, the only thing the Grizzlies did was they signed Jay Huff on the two way, and they waived Trey Jamison. And my question is, okay, so there was almost any not movement at all. Was this okay because we didn't really need to make moves, or do you think that we should have made any move? Or yeah, my point is, and that's my opinion. Of course, I want to know yours. I do think that we didn't move moved on free agency because we were like cleaning up the house, and we have the players we need, so we didn't really had to move. What's your opinion?
Yeah, I would say yeah, pretty similar to that. I mean, like I said earlier, I was interested in them maybe getting a guy like an Isaiah Hartenstein.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe even, I mean, once I saw what his deal turned out to be, like probably not like a KCP or somebody like that, but in terms of signing like a big name free agent, the Grizzlies don't really just don't really do that in general,
Yeah.
especially if you look at since Kleiman has been there. I mean, the only free agent that I can really remember them even signing was when they signed Tyus Jones, and I think that was like in 2019. And if you
Hmm.
really look at it, like most of the guys that they have on the roster, they either were signed or they traded for them, right? That like or they drafted or traded for them. Like they don't really sign a lot of free agents in Memphis in general, so that didn't really surprise me. I thought that if there were any big moves, it would have been in trades. And then I think once they didn't really get a lot of traction on, maybe trading Laravia. Obviously, they traded Zaire, but Zaire didn't have like a ton of value. They traded Roddy during the middle of the season,
Hmm.
and then they are replacing guys that were in the rotation like that with, a Gigi, with the Vince, and stuff like that. And then obviously having Luke Kennard now and everything. I think that they feel like they have enough now, especially adding Edie to be the center, because I think if they were gonna sign a free agent, it probably would have been to be the center position. But then when you take a center top 10, that kind of makes you think, okay, he's gonna start, right? You take a
Yeah.
dude ninth
Yeah.
overall, he's most likely gonna start pretty early on, and then any other big guy you got would have been like a backup center rather than, if they had tried to sign the Hartenstein or somebody like that, which they ended up not doing. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
no, I am completely fine with that, just because I think that when you look like across the league, it's kind of going away from the whole super team model where you have like three all stars on a team. Obviously, you
Hmm.
still have like the Suns who are still trying to do that, but it didn't work out very well for them last year. So
Yeah.
you have Ja, Jaren, and Bane as your core three guys, even if they aren't all necessarily like superstar level players. I think Ja is, but and then two guys that are probably all star level guys, which I think is plenty to win in this league plus depth. So I think when you look at it, it's like who out there could they really have brought in that either would have been one of their top three players, which I don't think there was many that even would have been in that in that case, and they didn't have enough money to sign like a super big name. And then when you look at the depth of the roster, you would have had to trade probably a couple people in order to
Hmm.
make some more room. So I'm fine with it. I think I mean, especially now that they brought in three rookies too, they're going to continue to build through the draft, and especially with some of the new stuff that's coming in with the new CBA, with the tax aprons and how much money people are going to be making and all of that. Having those rookie contracts when you're trying to contend and having good players on those rookie contracts when you're trying to contend is going to be a big deal. Especially when you look at Vince and Gigi only making basically $2 million a year.
Yeah. Yeah.
On top of now, you'll have Jalen Wells and Cam Spencer basically not locked up for the next like 4 years as well. So I think it's going to be awesome. I think it's going to be good for them this season. And like maybe you would have liked to see them, be a little bit more aggressive in free agency or try to make one more splashy trade. Uh, but I think re-signing Luke, getting who they got in the draft, I think that still is a step in the right direction.
Yeah. How did you see the situation with Luke?
Yeah, so with Luke, it really seemed like to me they were trying to avoid going into the first tax apron,
Hmm.
which I'm not going to get too deep into it because obviously even I don't understand all of the intricacies of it because it's
Yeah.
very confusing. But
Uh-huh.
basically, once you get into those tax aprons, the NBA puts a lot of
Restriction.
yeah, it's a lot of restrictions. It's a lot harder to make trades. It's a lot harder to sign people. Like one of the things is you can't combine multiple player salaries to bring in somebody who has a bigger salary, and stuff like that. If you're over the second apron, it's like your first round pick automatically goes to 30 and goes to the end of the round, and it's like a
Hmm.
bunch of crazy stuff like that. That especially for the Grizzlies, which if you're a team like the Celtics don't have to worry about that because they're a bigger market team.
Mm-hmm.
They already know their starting five, and they paid their starting five all. Which I don't know. I'm still doing the math to figure out how they have five guys making $100 million. But they did that. They've already won the championship. They are committed to that. For the Grizzlies, obviously you hope this works out, but especially in a smaller market, you're not in the position to where you can just sell out like that and just give up draft picks, give up your flexibility in trades and stuff like that, because that's the best way to improve a roster like this. Because like I said earlier, you don't have a lot of free agents that are just being like, I'm going to play for Memphis and nowhere else, or I only want to go to the Grizzlies or something like that. Like, you don't have a lot of guys that are really clamoring to come to Memphis. Most
Mm-hmm.
of the time, when guys do also want to come to Memphis, they have to come. They have to get there in a trade. That's just
Yeah.
like how it's been in general. So if you have restrictions on trades, and that's the only way you really build your team besides the draft, it's just going to make everything a lot harder.
Yeah. Uh, and it's yeah, it's related with what you just said, and it's something that you said before. How would you evaluate Zach Lyman's work?
Yeah, I think Zach Kleiman has done a really good job of finding value in second round picks. Obviously with GG, I think this year with Cam Spencer and Jalen Wells, it'll be like that. Xavier Tillman, as
Mm-hmm.
a later pick, obviously that was a great pick as well. And
Vince.
then Vince Williams, thank you. I was about to say, I know I'm missing somebody. And even Kenny Lofton
Bain.
Jr.
Yeah, yeah, Bain
Bain
was
and
his 30th pick, I
yeah,
think.
so Bain was almost a second round pick, but
Yeah.
I still think in terms of like value, that's probably the best pick he's ever done. Uh, to get him at 30, and it's not even like he's a top 5 player in that
Yeah.
draft class, and they
Mm-hmm.
got him at 30. The only person who I think has a chance to be even more of a steal would be possibly Gigi, just because I could see him being a top 5 player in his draft class as well, and he was at 45. But I
Mm-hmm.
think he's done a really good job on his late round picks. The only draft that he struggled with to me was really the Laravia Roddy draft. I think those two weren't great. Obviously, like that's what they got rid of Roddy. Zaire at 10 at the time was an upside swing that didn't hit. But the good thing is like you can look across the NBA, even when you look at a guy like the Thunder, like Sam Presti. Even Sam Presti has made his mistakes. They
Mm-hmm.
had Alexei Pokashevsky. Like they everybody has the mistakes of a guy that you're like, oh, I think he can do this, I think he can do that, and they don't pan out. But I do think that he has corrected his mistakes pretty well in terms of when Zaire hasn't been working out, he didn't just hold on to him for too long. He went ahead and moved on. Same thing with Roddy. He knew it was time to move on from Roddy, moved on from him. So I think that's been a positive. And then he also hasn't been afraid to let guys walk or possibly trade them. Like with the trading DeAnthony Melton, at the time, obviously a lot of people were mad about it and stuff like that. And
Mm-hmm.
then they drafted Laravia, so it didn't make it look as good as it possibly could have.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe you draft somebody else; they're a little bit better in the system, and that pick looks a lot better. I mean, at the end of the day, you still got a first round pick for a bench player, so
Mm-hmm.
that's another thing that I look at. And then I think he's done a good job of using the postseason to determine like who needs to stay, who needs to go. Like as much as I loved watching Tyus Jones on the team after that run he had, uh, against the Lakers and everything,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
it was just clear that when you have even though you know when Ja was hurt, it was awesome to have Tyus to go to, but
Yeah.
they needed to try to find somebody that could also play with Ja if needed. And I think that's why they got a guy like Marcus Smart who can be the backup point guard, but can also start at the 3 if he has to, start at the 2 if he has to. So just because it's hard to have multiple guards that you can't play with your best guard. And then they did try the Tyus and Ja thing at times, and
Mm-hmm.
it worked out. And like at the end of that Timberwolves series a couple years ago, it worked out.
Mm-hmm.
But they just can never do that for like super long stretches. And then as the backup point guard, Tyus just couldn't affect the game as well as he could when he was when he was starting. So
Yeah.
I think making those tough decisions, deciding to move on from Dylan Brooks, I think was the right decision. Even though there's a lot of other stuff that kind of went into that, especially when you look at the amount of money he got from the Rockets.
Yeah.
I think there's no question that was the right move. So I think all in all, he's mostly made the right moves. Obviously, like I said, he's made some mistakes too. There's a couple guys that he probably could have drafted somebody better or somebody like that.
Yeah.
Look back and been like, they could have had Christian Brown instead of Jake LaRavia,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like
Yeah.
that's a guy that I think could have been. I mean, he was good for the Nuggets, won a championship his first year. If they make that pick, not saying they win a championship or anything, but they're in a better place than they are now. So obviously he's made some mistakes, and I think he himself would also admit that.
Yeah.
But overall, I think he's done a good job of keeping uh, the Grizzlies' best interest first, and I think he's also done a good job of listening to the players about what they want, what they need from the team.
Yeah. Yeah. As we say here in Portugal regarding soccer, football, okay, whatever. It's easy to. There's an expression. It is easy to coach after the game is over. So yeah, everybody makes mistakes. But yeah, I agree with you. I think I like Kleinman a lot. I think he's been doing a very good job, and he's learning from mistakes he's done in the past. One quick word, Zaire. We had a couple of years ago. We had expectations. He left. You want to say something about Zaire?
Yeah, no, and it's just like I mean, I like Zaire, and I really
Me
wanted
too.
Zaire. Yeah, like I really wanted Zaire to be good. And I mean, he showed flashes, and he had his moments. And I think earlier this year, he even had like that 27-point game, where it's
Mm-hmm.
just like, okay, you can see the potential, but it's just the inconsistency. It's just the inconsistency and the injuries is what killed him. I mean, he had his moments where he played well, and then even his rookie year. I mean, his rookie year, I'm pretty sure he started a playoff game
Mm-hmm.
his rookie year against the Warriors. And it was like I remember coming out of that, I was like, wow. I mean, he started his rookie season horribly, but he turned it around, and by the end of the year, he was making plays against a team that was a multiple time champion against all time greats. Had a big game. I think it was game two, maybe no, game five. Game five against the Warriors, he had a really big game
Mm-hmm.
as
Mm-hmm.
well. Where it's like he was, guarding Steph, doing stuff like that, and then also on the other end, scoring pretty well. I think he had like 10, 15 points in that game. So it's just like he had his flashes. It just was never consistent enough. And then the injuries derailed him. And then last season, I think he had one game where, like I said, he had one game. I think he had like 27. But
Yeah, it
outside of
was
that,
the Bucks, I think.
yeah, but like outside of that, he just didn't play well enough at the end of the day. And I think he's a good person. I think he can
Mm-hmm.
possibly become a good player one day. Uh, Going to the Nets, I think could be good for him just because they're not going to have really any expectations. So maybe he can play a little bit freer, see what happens with that. But at the end of the day, he wasn't playing as well as the Grizzlies needed him to play. So they had to move on from him, and I think it was the right decision. And even like going into last season, I was like, they had to figure out who was going to be that fifth starter. And I was on the Zaire train. I thought Zaire was, the guy that could do that, especially when you look at the way that Coach Jenkins was talking about him going
Mm-hmm.
into the season. And he
Mm-hmm.
won that job, became the starter, everything like that. and then more injuries, more stuff like that. It's just like a lot of stuff went wrong for him. But in that happens to a lot of guys in the league, and I don't think it's his fault. But he just wasn't playing well enough, man. And it's a
Yeah,
business. It's a business at the end of the day.
yeah, I agree. And I just want to state that, yeah, I agree with you. I think he had to go. But I do like Zaire also, especially like as a person, the vibe that I get from him, and I really hope that he uh, works out well on Nets or on the NBA in general, of course. Also, Jake, your thoughts on Jake?
Yeah, so Jake, similar to Zaire, it's just I think his main issue has been injuries more than anything. And I think you even saw that in like I think his summer league this year
Mm-hmm.
was just very indicative of that. Like you really just see he had his moments, he had his games where he played well. Similar to Scottie Pippen Jr., he was doing good in the passing lanes, getting steals, playing good defense, making shots, like doing all that kind of stuff. And then, he has a couple knee injuries. He's like limping off the court and everything like that. And it's just like, oh my gosh, it just seems like every single time when he has a chance or when he starts to look pretty good, it just it just ends in an injury, whether it's a sprained ankle, whether it's a knee injury, whatever it is. There's a lot of there's a lot. He's had a lot of different issues. I think he had like an eye
And I,
injury.
I was going to mention that. Yeah, and I think, yeah.
Yeah, it's always something with him. It just seems like he can never really he can never really stay healthy for a 20 game stretch. And then even last year it was the same way where he came in and I thought he did play some of his best ball of his
Mm-hmm.
career last season, and then he
Mm-hmm.
still had some of those injury issues.
Yeah. Uh, okay. So now, I want to ask you, um, name your like three favorite Greece players. You can start like for the third, and then the second, and the first.
So, do you want right now or you want ever? Because that's different answers.
It's your choice, and you can do both if you want.
All right. So, I mean, if it's ever, I'll probably take. See, it's hard to put them in order.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I know number one is still Zach Randolph. Zach Randolph's always gonna be my number one, just because I was like 10, 11 years old going to those games,
Mm-hmm.
and as much as I do love Ja, I'll put Ja probably second already,
Mm-hmm.
but it's just like it's really hard to compare like the love you have for a player when you're like 10 years old watching those games.
Yeah,
So it's
yeah.
like whenever I see Zach Randolph, like Zach Randolph is the person that I would probably be the most like fanboy over, or like be like, hey, I need a picture, or be like, oh shoot, that's Zach Randolph. Whereas like obviously with the guys on the team right now, it's also different because I feel like they're like almost the same age as me. So it's like I'm not trying to be like weird, but it's
Mm-hmm.
like with like Zebo, I'd be like, oh yeah, I need a picture, I need an autograph. I'm doing all of that. So I'm taking him first. I'll take Ja, and then I'll take Marc Gasol too, and then honorable mentions to Jaron and Tony Allen and Mike Conley. But like,
Oh,
but for like lower key guys, if you want like some deeper cuts,
yeah.
I'm
Go
going
ahead.
like I'm taking like role players. Give me like
Yeah.
Courtney Lee. Courtney Lee, I really liked Courtney Lee when he was on the Grizzlies. I was a big Jermichael Green fan. Jermichael
Uh-huh.
Green's one of my favorite role players. And then current guy, which obviously we talked about him, is Vince Williams. I'm a big Vince Williams guy, just because I love the type of players who understand their role from the beginning,
Mm-hmm.
and accept that, and then also guys who just have that super high motor. The motor that he has, he just never stops. And that's why I said earlier, like he's the type of dude. If I was coaching a team, I'd be like, I want Vince Williams on every single team I have because I will find you can find a spot for him anywhere, and he's gonna do what needs to be done to win.
Yeah, yeah, I 100% with you. Uh, and it's okay. So non-Grizzlies favorite players, y- current.
Current players, non
Well, whatever, current or all time,
okay,
your choice.
okay. I'm taking Kevin Durant just because I mean, just completely pure scorer, can do everything on the basketball court. I will take I'll take Giannis.
Mm-hmm.
I love Giannis. Uh uh I'm a big small market guy. And I like the
Mm-hmm.
fact that, he got drafted by a small market and has stayed there, brought them a championship. And he's kind of the guy that I'm hoping Ja can be for the Grizzlies,
Uh-huh.
bring that championship back to Memphis. And then another guy I really like. I'm a big Tyrese Maxey fan. Tyrese Maxey is a
Me
younger
too.
guy,
Me
but
too.
I always find myself like, I like Joel Embiid, but every time I watch the 76ers, I always come away being like, dang, Tyrese Maxey is
Yeah.
just an incredible player to watch. And then I know you said three, but also I'm throwing in Wimby too, just
Mm-hmm.
because
Yeah.
just because the every time you watch that man play, it's like and last year I was at Summer League as well, and I got to see a couple of his games live, and it's just every single time you tune into one of his games, you're gonna see something that you've never seen before. Like every single time, even in the Olympics, I was like, I saw this dude steal the ball. This dude was at the free throw line and he stole the ball from somebody that was at the freaking 3-point line. And I'm like, how is that even possible? Like, is
Yeah.
it's
Yeah. Yeah.
it's crazy. So, and I've been obviously like a lot of big basketball fans. I've been following his journey since he was like 15. And he's just super. He has every reason to be like super arrogant and just be like one of those type of dudes, but he isn't. He's super humble, down to
Mm-hmm.
earth.
Yeah.
He honestly seems like if he wasn't 7'5", I feel like he would be like a really good like therapist or somebody like that. Like I just feel like he's one of those dudes where it's like, yeah, if you bring him your problems, he'll help you figure it out. He just like a genuine type of dude like that. So yeah, I'll put
Yeah.
him up there too.
Okay. So since we deviated a little bit in a month or so, you were working for NBC with the Olympics. How was it? How was that for you?
Oh yeah, no, it was awesome. So I was at the NBC headquarters in Connecticut, so I wasn't all the way in Paris, but it was still like just awesome to get to work that. Uh, because my main job has always been like TV production. That's what I do more than anything, which I love covering the Grizzlies as well. But that's one of the things that I completely love to do. And when I first got the like applied for it to like work for it this year. I wasn't really sure like how it would end up. It kind of was like a longer process because it's a big deal and everything like that.
Mm-hmm.
But once I finally got through it, the hours were long because I was basically working 12-hour days the whole time I was there, just because of how many events are going on. But
Mm-hmm.
the work was like very rewarding. I got to meet a lot of awesome people, and then I love sports, so whenever obviously everybody has days where they don't like their job, but when
Of
your
course.
job is watching sports, it makes it,
Yeah.
not just watching sports, but it makes it a lot
Yeah.
better. It makes it a lot
Yeah.
easier.
Yeah, for sure. How did you see Team USA?
Yeah, yeah. Team USA, especially this year. I mean, there are some times where you can't always tell like in a moment, like you can't always tell, but there are some times where it's like basketball fans will always remember where they were when certain things happened. Whether it was
Mm-hmm.
like, going back to 2016 with LeBron, I
Mm-hmm.
always remember watching Kobe jump up on the table after beating the Celtics and the fist pump and all that. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and then even a shot like Kawhi's shot against the Sixers, like those plays that we
Yeah.
will always see like over the next 10, 15, 20, whatever years. That was like the culmination of all of those, of basically like the guys I've been watching my whole life, right? When it's like Steph, LeBron, and KD, it was
Of
like the
course.
culmination of all of their careers together to finally come together and be on that big stage at the same time, and for them to get it done, and not only get it done, but to get it done in like almost heartbreaking fashion. Like you had to come all the way back against Serbia.
Yeah, that game was shaky.
Like,
I watched
yeah,
it.
that
Yeah,
game
yeah.
was insane. And then you have to beat France in probably the toughest it's probably the toughest game a Team USA team has ever had to play in terms of the atmosphere. Because you're basically playing a road game in
Hmm.
the Olympics, which
Yeah.
just does not happen very often. Because a lot of the times, the place that's hosting the Olympics, even if they do have a big crowd, the crowd doesn't also go with the talent. When you have also the talent of that France team, when you have, obviously Wemby and Gobert, and then you have Yabusele, who played awesome, and guys like that. So it's like a very talented team that could compete, regardless of where you're at. Plus, you get that extra home court advantage. Uh, it's I think that, but like especially the basketball at the Olympics, that was probably the most fun I've had watching an Olympics and watching Olympic basketball. Just because of the different, like the guys that were there finally all getting to play together, and then also the competition. And you see, this was one of the first Olympics where I really was locked in for like the non-team USA games too, just because there were so many like other great players on other teams. Because it really
Hmm.
used to be, whereas maybe they might have an NBA player on another team, but they didn't have a lot of like super great NBA players on their team. Like obviously, you had the Gasol brothers and guys
Yeah.
like that. Uh, and like they're always great players internationally, but like now it's to the point to where a lot of the top 4 or 5 players, top 10 players are international, to the point to where it's almost 50-50 in terms of the best players in the league. And so when you go through and you have Shea for Canada, and then you have Giannis in Greece, and Jokic for Serbia, and
So
it's just
yeah.
like all these different guys. Uh, and then also, I was glad I got to watch Santi. I got to watch Santi.
Yeah.
I think Santi played really well in FIBA, too. So I tried to watch all the Spain games, the Canada games, Australia and Serbia had a great game too, where Serbia came all the way back from like down by like 24 points. It was pretty insane.
Hmm.
Uh, and that was for them to get a chance to play Team USA in that game. So it just the Olympics in general were awesome. Basketball at the Olympics, I think this is the best it has been.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Great. 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 Okay. Now heading back to the Grizzlies. One quick question. How do you see Taylor Jenkins?
Yeah, so I like Taylor Jenkins. I think that Taylor Jenkins is a really good coach, especially when it comes to like the defensive end. I think
Uh-huh.
he's done pretty good in terms of keeping the Grizzlies defense as a top 5, top 10 defense in the NBA. One thing that I think he can improve on would be like rotations. I do
Mm-hmm.
feel like he could have better rotations, especially when it comes to, maybe playing guys a few more minutes. Like I know that with injuries and stuff like that, sometimes that hurts. But it's like sometimes I feel like he goes a little bit too deep into the bench. I think sometimes he's not quick enough to pull somebody, especially a bench player, if they're not playing well. I
Hmm.
think that would be like one of my only things is like the rotational stuff. But I do think that he does a good job of some of those like in-game adjustments.
Hmm.
Whereas you'll have a guy that hasn't really played at all for maybe a couple weeks, but he really likes him against this matchup, so he'll insert him into the lineup. Which that does work sometimes, but that also does go into sometimes where it's like, well, they're not always in the lineup, so it doesn't always work out. But I think he does he tries to do it when he can, but I just feel like sometimes the leash is a little bit too long on some of the bench players, and the rotations and stuff like that. And then his offense, I think that the one thing that I think they could add to the offense is letting guys who take more mid-range jumpers or somebody like Lamar Stevens who was out there last year, or getting Jaron to maybe have a little bit more in his mid-range instead of making everybody, because I know the way the NBA is going, it's like three or nothing, but it's like they have to be able to attack the paint.
Hmm.
Besides Ja, they have to be able to possibly score in the post, especially trying to get the ball to Jaron. And I think Jaron needs to be kind of coached into a way of like, hey, uh, when you get the ball in the paint, you don't always just have to go to the left hook. Like, we'd like to see you maybe see if you can get to a mid range jumper, or maybe like a turnaround jumper, or maybe find like some other ways to score that's a little bit more consistent. But I think like with the new coaching staff they have this year, especially,
Yeah, I
uh,
was going to ask you, like, Lizalo, Thomas Lizalo from Paris FC. You mentioned the offense, and Paris FC had the best offensive rating in the whole world uh, last season.
yes, and see, and this is the other thing is that the best thing that I like to see from coaches is when they try to shore up their weaknesses
Mm-hmm.
by adding guys like that. So it's like I think that yeah, with Tuma Sasalo and all them, Noah LaRoche, who he's somebody who he's trained Paul George. He's trained like a lot of other former players, so that was good. Jason March, I think him
Mm-hmm.
having a chance to come up from the hustle. Whereas if you think about it, a lot of the guys who are on the roster now, whether you're talking about Gigi and Vince specifically, both
Mm-hmm.
of those guys were coached by Jason
In
March
March. Yeah.
more than they were probably coached by any of the Grizzlies assistants they had last year. So in terms of like player development, I'd argue that he has as good of a track record as anybody when it comes to Grizzlies players. And then when you look at the way like Scottie Pippen Jr. even played, the way Jacob Gilliard played undersized,
Mm-hmm.
obviously it's going to be tough for him, but it's like you had him running the offense with the hustle, and then he came to the Grizzlies, and the only reason that he isn't better is because of his height. Like if he was 6'2", I
Mm-hmm.
think he'd be an everyday, like even if he wasn't a starter, he'd be an everyday backup point guard at least in the
Yeah.
NBA. And I think that he got everything he could out of a guy like that. And I just think like you see a lot of players like even Tillman, which Tillman now obviously isn't on the team anymore, but he spent a lot of time with the hustle as well. And now he's not an everyday player for the Celtics, but he's an NBA champion. So it's like you
Yeah.
have a lot of guys and that were later round picks, maybe guys that are picked in the 40s in general. Usually, like if you're picked in the 40s and you get a second contract, that's usually a positive. And
Mm-hmm.
it looks like Jason March is going to have multiple players that he developed with the hustle that are going to be in line to get second contracts in the NBA. So in terms of player development, I think that bringing him up to the main team and having him working with Gigi and Vince, especially because he's worked with them before. I think that's going to be really awesome.
Yeah. And also, as you mentioned, it's a good thing that Taylor Jenkins, as a head coach, can, like, understand where the team can improve and where he can get the help to the team for improvement, right?
Yeah, for sure. And then like you said, I mean, bringing in is Salo as well. Like that's the biggest move I think of the offseason. When you look, like you said, they had the number one offensive rating, not just in the Euro League, but like in the world, if you
Hmm.
include all the NBA teams too.
Yeah.
Like that is it. Whenever you can add a guy like that, especially to be an assistant coach, uh, it's one of those things where I don't think I don't think he's going to be a Grizzlies assistant for long,
Hmm.
because he's either going to be the head coach of another team, or if something does go wrong and they do decide to move on from Taylor Jenkins, I wouldn't be surprised if he was high on the
Yeah.
list of people they'd consider. So, like, I don't think he's going to be an assistant coach for very long, though.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So heading into next season, first of all, people are sleeping on the Grease.
Yes, that's where I want it to be. I want people to be sleeping on him. And
Okay.
I think that's the perfect, especially for how the team is. It's a group of guys that feed on being undervalued, or people not thinking they're good enough. I mean, basically outside of like Jaron, I think Jaron is the only one that doesn't have that same, like, with Ja, it was that he was under recruited in high school. He was a no star recruit, all of this, and went to
Hmm.
Murray State. You look at Bain, even though he was averaging, almost 20 a game, shooting 40%, he fell to 30. Vince Williams Jr. fell to the second round. Gigi Jackson fell to the second round. Add a guy like Zach Edey, who, even though he had all of the accolades in college, has
Hmm.
consistently had people tell him that he's not going to be anything in the NBA. He's not going to translate to the next level. He's like, it's a bunch of guys who have a chip on their shoulder, and a bunch of guys who have something to play for. And I think that's what because I mentioned Jaron too, is I think the chip on Jaron's shoulder can be coming out of last season as well, can add to that. So I think it's like you'll have a group of a bunch of guys who is like they either have stuff in their past that they're trying to get over, stuff in their past that they're trying to prove people wrong, or on the other side, when it comes to like a guy like Edie, trying to prove that he can play in the NBA. And I think when you have all of that kind of going together, on top of the fact that they're being underrated by the league in general, I think that's going to add more fuel to the fire.
Yeah, I like. Yeah, me too. I like the people are sleeping on the Grease. I think it's the perfect scenario too. I agree with you. So, okay, we all know the West is packed. But how do you see the Grizzlies performing this season? And like, um, on regular season, um, where do you see the Grizzlies standing at the end?
So regular season, I mean, it's like the West is going to be tough. The West is going to be tough every year.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but I think they should, at the very least, they'll be a top six team. I'd
Mm-hmm.
expect them to be a top four team in the West. Like I expect them to be in that group, whether it's like OKC, Minnesota, uh, the Nuggets, the Mavs, like teams like that. I think they should be closer to those teams than they should be to the play-in. Like I expect them to be a better team than the Pelicans and the Kings and like some of those teams who I think
Mm-hmm.
still are going to be very good teams. Like because the West has that many good teams, but I do expect I do expect them to be in that top four, whether it's four, whether it's three, somewhere in there. I don't know if I'd expect them to get the one or the two seed again.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I mean, I'm not saying it's out of the question, but they'd have to have like a perfect storm. They'd have to have a lot of guys stay healthy. Which after the way last season ended, they are due to have a season where everybody just stays healthy. Obviously, that's not started off well with Gigi getting hurt, but at least be healthy when the postseason comes around. That's all I care about.
Yeah.
But like as long as they're, and I will say this, as long as they're in the top six, like
Uh-huh.
the seeding doesn't affect me as much. Like I'm not going to be too worried about the seeding, just because like I think every time like in this era that the Grizzlies have gone to the playoffs. So the first time, they lose to the Jazz, they
Uh-huh.
didn't have home court advantage, but they also won game one, right? Next
Yeah.
year they come back, they play the Timberwolves, they lose game one at home. Next series they play the Warriors, they lose game one at home.
Mm-hmm.
The next season they play the Lakers, they lose game one at home.
Same one.
So
Yeah.
it's like obviously you want to have home court advantage. Home court
Oh,
advantage is what you want. Yes, I definitely want it. But when you look at all these other series that they've played so far, they got home court advantage and immediately lost it in game one. So it's almost like even if they are like a six seed, like I would almost feel better about them going on the road the first two and being like, hey, you just got to win one of these first two, and now you're in a
yeah.
rhythm coming back home, rather than now you have to go on the road for a game three that's pivotal, especially in the NBA today because of how close the teams are. Like I'd almost rather have game three and four at home than game one and two, just because it's like those are usually more pivotal games. And then having a chance to go up 3-1 on your home court. And then even if you lose game five, you have game six back at your place. Like, I think that's a great situation to be in for a lot of teams. Uh, but like I said, obviously, you want home court advantage. If you can get home court advantage, go for it. But I'm not the person that thinks that, oh, if they are the sixth seed, then they just have no chance. Like I think if
Yeah.
I think they'd be just fine.
Where do you see the Grizzlies going in the postseason?
The postseason, I would say that this year, like obviously the goal every year is to win a championship.
Of
For me to
course.
see this season as a success, the
Mm-hmm.
Grizzlies, I think this year they have the best roster they've had. Uh, I don't know if I'd say ever, but it's one of the best rosters they've ever had, just in general. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that they need to try to do something that the Grizzlies have never done, which is win a conference finals game. I think if even if they don't end up going to the finals, I think if the Grizzlies, get to the conference finals and win, you know, even if they lose in seven or six or whatever once they get there, if they get there and they win games in the conference finals and they can prove that they are on the right trajectory and they haven't taken another step back, I think that would be a success. But like that's what I think. But I do think this is the year it's deep playoff run or bust. So it's like if they don't make a deep playoff run this year, you're gonna have to look very hard at like last off season and the last couple off season, they've had to
Mm-hmm.
look very hard at the supporting cast. But if it comes into this year or the next 2 years and they still haven't got it, at least made it to the finals, made it to the Western Conference Finals, proven that they're like a true contender like that, that's when you start wondering if maybe you're more ready to move on from a Jaren or a Bane or somebody like that, which obviously I'm not anywhere near there yet. That would be years down the line. But we're getting to the point to where they're not the young team anymore. They're still
Yeah.
young, but this is what, year six for
Yeah.
Ja,
Yeah.
year seven for Jaren. Like we're like these guys are veterans. These guys are getting to the point to where they're expected to be competing for championships. And I think that as a fan base and the front office, and even as the players, I mean, Jaron and Ja, Bane, they've all said that it's the goal is to win a championship. And I think we'd be doing them a disservice if we don't hold them to that same standard. So like going to the finals, getting to the Western Conference Finals, stuff like that. I think that's what the goal should be going into the season, and I think if they stay healthy, they definitely will have a chance to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. As long as they stay healthy. Yeah. I'm 100%. Yeah. And I think that also I think that's important to take that leap to make a Western Conference Finals. to prove that this team is really a contending team, which I truly believe it is. But then, of course, you have to show it on the court, of course.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. Okay. You're from Nashville, so it's kind of obvious how you are a Grizzlies fan because well, Nashville and Memphis are in Tennessee, right?
Hmm. Yeah, for sure. Like, so it is a little different because even though Tennessee isn't like one of the biggest states necessarily,
Mm-hmm.
uh, it is like very long. So it's
Mm-hmm.
like to get from Nashville to Memphis, it is about like a 3.5 hour drive.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't like super easy for me to get to games growing up. But I honestly will say, like, I know it's probably different for you because of like time zones and like stuff like that
Yeah.
too. But I know that for me, I actually became a Grizzlies fan from watching on TV more than even going to the games. Like I did get to go to like some games. I went to some playoff games, stuff like that, with my dad and everything, and my grandfather. We'd always go to games together. But I really became a fan from watching on TV and watching with Pete and Brevin, and I really fell in love with the team through that. Getting home from practice or a game or something when I was playing sports in high school and middle school and stuff like that, and immediately turning on the TV to watch and see Zach Randolph, Mike Conley, Tony Allen, Marcus All, those guys. Just and that was really the team that I fell in love with. I was a Grizzlies fan before that too, but honestly,
Mm-hmm.
I think any Grizzlies fan will tell you that before the Zebo, Mike, and Mark and Tony years, before those years, there just wasn't a lot to cheer for. So it's like I would watch the games and I just get, disappointed all the time. And it
Yeah.
makes you not want to watch it as much. And then once you finally get a taste of that success and you realize, like, oh, wow, this is what it's like when, even if it's not winning a championship, this is what it's like when your team is just relevant. Like, it was just awesome. So that's really when I fell in love with the team. But yeah, that's how I became a Grizzlies fan. I really like to know how you became a Grizzlies fan, though, honestly, because Portugal, that's a ways away.
Yeah. Yeah. It's an emotional way. I became a Grizzlies fan. I used to watch the NBA. I used to follow NBA back in the 90s. But then, like for 15 or 20 years, I didn't really. I was watching, but not really tuned in. And like back in 21, I think 2021. I started to look to watch more NBA again, and I didn't have a team back in the 19s. I didn't really have a team because I really didn't. I like to watch basketball, but I didn't really like feel a connection to any team.
Hmm.
And back in 2021, I was watching a game. Um, it was the Chicago Bulls were playing the Memphis Grizzlies. And to be honest, I was watching that game because I had to place a small bet on DeMar DeRozan scoring. And
Yeah.
and I was watching like the third quarter and then the fourth quarter to see if the bet would pay off or not. And then I started noticing this guy Jamaran. I didn't know him at the time, and I was really like impressed. The thing that I got out of that game was, who the fuck is this guy? And so after that, I started wanting to see more of Jamarant and then the Grizzlies, and that's how I became to know the Grizzlies better. Um, and after that, I started to learn about more about the team itself, the culture of the city, which I found as many touching points with my own hometown, Porto, in Portugal. The hardworking people, the grit and grind, the loyalty, the underdog mentality. That's a lot of things that related to. even to my football, soccer, football, whatever you want to call it, team, FC Porto. Uh, those things all related, and so it was kind of natural. Yeah, it started with seeing Ja play, but then evolved a lot from that. And I can tell you, I told this because yeah, um, yeah, it's a question that I get asked frequently,
Hmm.
and yeah, but yeah, I can tell you that it's been like 3 years now, 3 4 years, um, and the whole vibe of the Grizzlies, Memphis, Tennessee, it really got me. And one day, Jai is not going to be playing. Jaren, Bain, all these players we've been talking, they not being player. If I'm still around, I'll still be a Memphis Grizzlies fan. Yeah, for sure. And
Hey,
it
yeah,
started with
that's
yeah,
awesome.
yeah.
That's awesome to hear. Well, and that's always what I hope, especially with having a superstar as big as Ja on the Grizzlies, is that a lot of people, like you said, will come to watch Ja, or they'll tune
Hmm.
in and they'll notice, wow, Ja is awesome and all this. But
Hmm.
then
Of
when they
course.
actually start to do research, on the rest of the team and the history and the city and stuff like that, they can really fall in love with like all aspects of the team, and like the rest of the team too. So like, I really love to hear that.
Yeah, yeah, and also I really do feel thankful and blessed that okay, Jamorant and then the Grizzlies team led me into the Memphis culture that I knew a bit from music and arts, of course, but also like the vibe of the city and the whole state of Tennessee in general. And as I said before, and I'm Greece for life. Yeah, for sure. So yeah, and it started with a bet on the Rosen.
Yeah, no, that's the best part. Hey,
Yeah,
they do say that a lot of the times, like the best things come when you're not expecting it. So
yeah,
that's that's awesome.
yeah, yeah. That's yeah for sure. That was like the best bet I did. I don't know. I don't remember if I won it or not, but it was the best bet I did because the outcome was this. So yeah. Bryson, I want to thank you so much for being here. It was almost 2 hours conversation. Yeah, it passed like flying. Um, so
Yeah, it didn't. Hey, look, the good thing is it didn't feel like it was that long, man. So
no, I had
I
to check
really
now
appreciate
on the
it.
clock that it was 1 hour 25, 20, 1 hour 47 minutes that we were talking because I really didn't know. I was not watching. It was, yeah, it felt like it was flying, right?
Yeah, for sure. Hey, and like I said, if you ever need somebody to come on or anything like that, or if you ever decide to try to make a trip to a game or something, you got me on Twitter and everything. You can reach out to me there, uh, because I really like what you're doing with this, and I know that you've had a lot of people from Grizzlies Twitter on here, some media people as well. So I
Hmm.
just think it's really awesome that you're taking such an interest in the team from, like you said, from an entire ocean away. So yeah, just keep doing what you're doing,
Yeah,
and I hope that you get everything out of it that you're hoping for.
yeah. I thank you so much for that. And uh, as for the podcast, season starting, I'll do another series, and I sure will invite you to be in, and I hope that you, of course, that you will join in. And yeah, I one day I'll go to Memphis, and I'll sure to tweet you, and we'll see a game together. Yeah, we have to do that.
Perfect, perfect. Sounds like a plan.
Okay, and also keep up with your next gen podcast. It's also very cool to listen. So everyone that is listening, of course, people know. I'm just because but people know it. So yeah, I just want to say that it's also podcasts that I follow too.
Hey,
And
I
yeah.
really appreciate that. We're actually going to be coming back this week, so
Mm-hmm.
should be should be dropping back on Monday. After the summer, like I said, with all the Olympic stuff, it was really hard for me to really record anything. But now that I'm back home, back at my setup and everything like that, we'll be ready to go. It's perfect timing with training camp really being just about a month away. It's a lot closer than you would think, or not even a month away now. Really, only a
No,
couple
yeah,
weeks away. So
yeah. So yeah, keep it up. I'm looking for. You said you're going to drop it on Monday,
yep,
probably.
yep. Mondays. That's when we're going to be dropping
Okay.
them. And anybody listening who's still here at this point, you can always follow me on Twitter, Bryson Wright 3, and then you can follow Bluff City Media on Twitter as well. We'll be posting all the clips and all the links to the podcast, and you can also subscribe to Bluff City Media on YouTube as well. And then you'll be able to see all of my stuff there.
Okay. So Bryson, it was really a pleasure to have you here. And okay, we'll catch up later in the season. Okay.
Okay, perfect. Have a good rest of your night, man.
Okay. You too. Stay cool, brother.